Bibles, open it with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And here we go. This is our ninth inning. This is our fourth quarter. This is going to be our 18th hole, as it were. And we're going to try to speed through the whole chapter here with a close, with a flourish. And the theme will just be think bigger. That's it, think bigger. Think bigger in regards to your giving. Think bigger in regards to your hosting. Think bigger in regards to your serving and the way that you engage your church leaders. And think bigger, finally, even with your embracing, your affections, your caring, and your hugs. And so number one, we'll put it on the screen here this morning, is just think bigger, Paul says, as you give. Now remember, this is very practical. He's already given you all the theology. So by the time they get to the end of the letter, he's literally just saying, hey, these are the details, okay? These are the final details. And he starts with their giving. You'll see it there in chapter 16, verse 1. He says, now concerning, in the Greek epide, it's this transition to the final matters, now concerning the collection for the saints. As I directed the churches of Galatia, so I'm going to direct you as well. So all the churches of Asia Minor, on the first day of every week, let each of you put aside and save as he may prosper, as he makes money, as God provides. Then no collections will be made when I come. And when I arrive, whomever you may approve, I shall send with letters to carry your gift to Jerusalem. And if it's fitting, I can go as well, and they can come with me. And so I just want you to draw your attention real quick to this context here, this backdrop, where what was happening, if you can picture a map of the Middle East a little bit, you've got Israel down here on the side, kind of the Middle East, and then you come up around the Mediterranean, you got Asia Minor across the top in the Lycus Valley, and basically what he's saying is because of the famines that have hit down there in Jerusalem, I need all the Gentile churches, which are offshoots of this missionary movement that he's been a part of, to send money back to help Jerusalem. And we can understand that there is of course, a physical assistance there, but even more than that, it would have been spiritual for them. Because you have a divide in those early years between Jew and Gentile, and when all of a sudden you're a Jewish church, you're kind of the mothership back here, the mother church, and you have money coming back from the Gentile church plants to you, you realize the dividing walls are truly falling down in Christ. And so that's kind of the backdrop there. And it's right into that Paul gives some really clear principles for giving. In fact, maybe some of you have come into the room this morning and you came out of churches where it was almost like every Sunday was some emotive offering sermon, before the offertory. Or maybe some of you have watched like TBN, and you see those infomercials where they run where there's a poor, starving kid in Africa, and it kind of is trying to move your heart to give. And you've always wondered, what are the specifics about giving to a church that pleases God? And it's interesting. We'll go through them in 3 minutes here real quick. He kind of lays out the 5 principles of Christian giving. Look at it there. He says, number 1, I'll put it on the screen for you, it's systematic giving. You see it there in verse 2? It's systematic giving. He says, on the first day of the week. Now we know that's the Lord's Day. Sunday became the Lord's Day. He was resurrected on Sunday. And so even here in the first century, you already have the church starting to meet on Sunday. And he actually says, I want you to have a plan to bring your giving and give it on Sunday. It's not about, and that's a very deliberate thing. It's not an emotional giving. It's not, I got a bonus, and so I'll just throw something in the offering plate. He actually says, when you come into church on Sunday, I want you to have a plan prepared. Which leads to number 2. Look at this. It's a universal giving. You see in verse 2, he says, let each of you, meaning there's no exceptions. It's not just the wealthy people. It's not just the struggling people. It's everybody. In fact, even kids. You should teach your kids to give to the Lord. Whatever the Lord pours out, you have them pour back towards Him. Even your kids, their lemonade stand or their recycling business, the few pennies that they make, train them to be a consistent and deliberate giver, a committed giver to God. So number 1 is systematic giving. Number 2 is universal giving. Number 3, look at this, is proportional giving. You see it there in verse 2? As the Lord prospers. Now that is such an important line. In fact, some of you already will remember Mark chapter 12, verse 43. Where there's that amazing story. The Pharisees are walking up to put their money in the offering buckets, and so they have trumpeters play. Do, 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 do. And everyone's watching, the Pharisee as he pours his coins in and going, wow, that's a spiritual person. You remember that? And then Jesus is over on the sideline with his disciples, and all of a sudden he grabs their attention and he says, hey, watch that. Watch her. And up walks this widow. And she's dirt poor, and she walks up to the coffer, and she just drops in her 2 pennies. Tink, tink. And he says, that right there, that gift right there meant more than all of them combined. Because the teaching of the Bible is that it's not about the size of the gift, it's about the size of the sacrifice. God is always watching what? The heart. And that is so important when it comes to New Testament, New Covenant giving, because a lot of us have been raised in churches where it's like, well, it's got to be 10%, or maybe God won't bless it. But remember, Old Testament Israel was in a theocracy. They were paying taxes directly to God. It was upwards of 30%, but by the time you get to the New Covenant, all God says is, it's not about percentages, I just want your heart. It's proportional to what I have blessed you with. So number 1, it's systematic. Number 2, it's universal. Number 3, it's proportional. Number 4, look at this one, in the end of verse 2, it's even private. He says, I don't even want there to be a collection when I come. Now, let's just pause there for a second, okay? Paul says we're not doing marketing. I'm not doing gimmicks. I'm not doing an emotional storyline. I'm not putting up the starving kids of Africa. In fact, I want you to give before I get there, and I want it sealed in an envelope because I don't even want to know who gives. Well, that's a whole lot different than the stuff we see today. I mean, how many mailers and now emails do we get from people around the world saying, you got to give to us because we have the saddest sob story? I mean, by the time it gets to November, December, I have a spam account that's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bylines on who has the poorest kid that I need to give to. Paul says this isn't about emotion. This is about your intellect preparing spiritually to serve God because it's right. And then look at the last one there, verse 3, it's responsible giving. You see that? Whomever you approve, I'll send them. You get me the trustworthy guys, you pick the trusted men, and we're going to ensure that we're giving to a trustworthy ministry there in Jerusalem. What he's saying is no charlatans here, no con men. We want to make sure that the money we give is used in a way that's best stewarded for the kingdom. Which again goes against just giving to anybody and going, well, I gave to God, I hope it works. And you want to be thoughtful. We want to be thoughtful. That's one of the principles here. I don't know how many of you remember, Costi Hinn was here a few weeks ago, and if you don't know Costi, he is the nephew. His uncle is Benny Hinn, the supposed faith healer. Does everyone here know who Benny Hinn is? You remember back in the 90s, the guy with the white jacket who would like whip everybody, all right? This guy is a total con man. He's a total charlatan. In fact, Costi told a story one time where they were in Africa. Get this, third world nation. They're in Kenya. They've got hundreds of thousands of people lined up there in the audience. And then Benny would get up there and he would start cranking up the music and say, if you want God to bless you, then you got to give more money. And for 2 hours they were doing that as these big bodyguards were going through the crowds, riding in golf carts with big buckets with handles and putting it through the crowd. And then Costi said he accidentally walked into the hotel room that night, into his uncle's hotel room, and there was his uncle sitting on the couch with a pile of cash about head high sitting there. No accountability, no taxes, just a guy sitting there, and anyone who came into his room, he'd dole out a bunch of cash so that they could go party, right? That is not a man of God. That is a charlatan, you understand? We have to have accountability, and that's what Paul says here. So picture it this way. This is just point number 1, but basically in the final end matter, Paul, maybe some of you have had this before, walks over and he says, I want you to get your perspective up, and I want you to think bigger even about the way that you're giving. What you're doing with your finances. I mean, I don't know if you remember when you were little, I had this happen. My dad would often, because I was a talker, my tongue gets me in a lot of trouble. And when I was little, I would talk all the time. In fact, my parents called me Radio. That was my nickname, Radio. And so I would just talk. I want to do this, and I want to go do this, and I want to go do this. And by the way, I birthed one of those, and I'm raising another one of those now. And so the Lord has a sense of humor. And I want to go here, and I'm going to Knott's Berry Farm, I want to play baseball, and go on to basketball, and eventually my dad would do this. Anyone else have this happen around the dinner table or something? You're talking about all the things you see and all the things you want to do, and then he pauses you and sometimes grabs your chin and picks it up, and he says, hey, look around the room. You're not the only one, finish it with me, you're not the only one here, right? So okay. That's an easy one, Michael. Okay. All right. You're not the only one in the room. If Paul were here in 2023, it's almost like that. Like he would walk into the room and he would say, hey guys, You're focused down here on Orange County and all your toys and all the stuff you're doing. I need you to get your eyes up, and I just want to remind you that think bigger. There's a whole bunch else going on in the world. There's missionaries that are hurting. There's churches that are suffering. There's abortion mills being put in just an hour away from here to destroy life. I want you to get your eyes up, and I want you to start thinking about how you can invest and do something bigger, even with your money, he says. Which leads us to the second one. Let's move on. He says, think bigger as you give, and you're giving. But number two, look at this. Think bigger even as you host, in your hosting. And the way that you relate to other Christians when they come to your house or come to your church. And my wife is really good at this. I'm not. Verse 5. He says, but I shall come to you after I go through Macedonia. For I am going through Macedonia, and perhaps I shall stay with you, or even spend the winter, that you may send me on my way wherever I may go. For I do not wish to see you now just in passing. He's just going through the details. For I hope to remain with you for some time, if the Lord permits. But I shall remain in Ephesus until Pentecost. And by the way, the reason for that is because in the Mediterranean, during the winter, you would have these trade winds blow to the point that you couldn't sail a ship without it capsizing. And so he says, I have to wait till Pentecost in the spring in order to come. And then in verse 9, he explains the reason he wants to stay, though. For a wide door for effective service has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. And if anyone here has done their Bible study, you remember in Acts 19 what he's talking about, right? I mean, he had basically tried to teach the Jews. They kicked him out of the synagogue, so he goes into a school hall, rents it, and then this church explodes. And the gospel is going out into all of Asia Minor and across the Lycus Valley to the point that Paul actually at one point says, I mean, we're changing everything. And then what happens? He gets countered by the idol makers. He gets countered by the occult, the magicians, because the gospel is beginning to take away all of their income, their revenue. And so all of a sudden they're there in a theater and there's thousands of people gathered, a riot's breaking out, the Roman legions are on their way, and Paul's standing there to defend himself, and that's what he's writing about here. He says, man, God is on the move, and so I'm going to stay here a little longer. And then look what he says in verse 10. Now if Timothy comes. All right, show of hands. Who knows who Timothy is? His protege in the faith, young guy. Remember, probably in his late 20s at this point. He says, now if Timothy comes, see that he is without cause to be afraid. See, Paul loves Timothy. You remember in 1 Timothy actually said, Timothy, don't let anyone look down on your youth. But in speech and in conduct and in love, faith and purity, set yourself as an example. And he says, don't be timid anymore and fan into flame the gift inside of you, because he had this protege who tended to be a little weak in the knees. Interesting, you have the same picture here. He says, if he comes, see that he is without cause to be afraid, for he's doing the Lord's work, as am I. And don't you dare, that's a command in verse 11, despise him. But send him on his way in peace, that he may come to me, for I'm expecting him. See, Paul knows that a prideful, unkind church like Corinth could very easily put a knife in the back of Timothy and make him feel weak. But now watch how he flips it. You're going to love this in verse 12. He says, but concerning Apollos, now you remember who he is, right? He was the famous one. Everybody in Corinth loved Apollos. They fanboyed over him. Watch what he does. But concerning Apollos, our brother, the guy you all love, the guy you all lift up, the guy you all puff up, the guy who's elite in your mind, I encouraged him greatly to come to you, and it was not at all his desire to come. Nobody else laughed. Is that not funny? Nope. You don't find that funny at all. That he says, hey, the young guy, Elijah Kim, the young minister, who might be a little timid, right? The young guy who's serving at your church, I want you to make sure that you lift him up and you don't make him feel insecure and nervous. Oh, but by the way, the guy that you all looked up to, he don't even want to have anything to do with y'all. You talk about nailing them where it counts. I mean, think about it this way, all right? Who likes Dr. Steve Lawson? When he was here, who loved having Dr. Lawson here? All right, most of you, okay, who appreciates Dr. Lawson in general, okay? All right, great. Now imagine if right now I told you that after being here, Dr. Lawson doesn't like you. Some of you are like, whatever. But most of us would be like, oh, really? That's a bummer, That's what he just did. See, one of the things that we often forget about Paul, and you could write this there in the margin of your Bible if you want, just next to these verses, is Paul has what we call team spirit. Paul was always a team player, even though he was the famous one and he was the apostle, and people would often or sometimes cheer his coming, other times they would get angry with him or put him in jail. The reality was as though he wanted just as much applause and appreciation to go to the other guys, and he would have been a great point guard. He would have been a great quarterback because he always cared about the team. And by the way, he was never alone. It was always Paul and Mark, Paul and Timothy, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Aristarchus, Paul and Luke. He was never by himself because he was a team player. There was a bigger storyline than just Paul. So let's go ahead and slide that one over too to 2023. If Paul were here this morning, he'd walk over and he'd pick up our little chinny chin chins again and say, guys, I need you to start thinking bigger. It's okay that you get excited for Dr. Lawson coming to preach. That's okay. It's okay that Dr. Lawson couldn't get to the restroom when he was here, which is true, by the way. But you know what? There's a lot of other guys that are coming in and a lot of other missionaries coming in, and guess what? They're doing a lot of great things for God too. When Fally comes from Madagascar, we need to make sure that we show him respect and honor too. When Premen comes and he brings the good news of what God's doing in Fiji, we need to make sure that we appreciate and we honor him as well. When Johnny Artavenis comes back to preach this year, we need to show respect to him as well. He's a good man. When Albert Kilgore comes back, right? When Jeremy Vuolo comes to preach, when James Coates comes to preach, these are all great men of God, so make sure that you're also supporting and loving them as well. Not just the people that you believe are special. Then he moves on. Look at this. This is really interesting. He says, think bigger as you give. Think bigger as you host. Think bigger even as you follow. Look at verse 13. As you submit to your leaders, as you get behind him and you all pull the same direction, he says, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men and be strong, and let all you do be done in love. Now, we talked about that last month. Father's Day, you can go back and listen to it. And now verse 15, I urge you, brethren, and he gives a little parenthesis. You know the household of Stephanas? They that were the first fruits of Achaia and that they have devoted themselves for ministry to the saints. He means these were the first people I converted. He says, you know these leaders in your church who I saw converted, who I baptized, and you've watched how devoted they are to you. Look what he says in verse 16, that you also be in subjection to such men. Submit yourself to such men. Respect such men and to everyone else who helps them in the work and the labors. And then verse 17, and I rejoice over the coming of Stephanas and Fortunatus and Achaicus because they have supplied what was lacking on your part. That's so interesting. He says, they've given me, your servant leaders have given me what you never did. Verse 18, they have refreshed my spirit. And that word in the Greek is literally revitalized. They've energized my spirit and yours. So you need to acknowledge them. And hopefully, if you have a pen there, you can see what he's doing. He's moving from the remote missionaries down into their local leaders. And he says, make sure you're seeing bigger, you're thinking bigger, and you're willing to follow and respect and submit to these great men who are serving you. And I'll be honest, you got to love the reasons he says to follow them. I mean, in our era, right, guys, why do people go to a church? Have you ever thought about that? Why do they follow a certain pastor or leader? Have you ever heard the answer? Go ask your friends. Why do you go to Saddleback or whatever? All the answers are typically the same. Our pastor is so funny. He's a visionary. Our pastor is so handsome. You don't have that problem. Did you notice that it's nothing about the visionary leadership? It's nothing about how eloquent they are. It's nothing about how visionary of a leader they are. I mean, look at it. Verse 15. Number 1, he says, they're devoted men. They're devoted men. Let me look at that in verse 15. Let's just read it again real quick, okay? I urge you, brethren, you know the household of Stephanas, that they were the first fruits, the ones that were first converted, that they have They've devoted themselves. You know that word in the Greek, it's an intensive. It actually can mean addicted. And what it means is it's not something that comes from the outside, right? It's they're addicted to church on the inside. They don't do what they do because they're asked. They don't do it because they're paid. They don't do it because it's compulsory. That they're self-motivated and they're self-firing and they're self-launching Monday to Friday and 4 times on the weekend. It's a drive that comes from the inside out. And he says, those are men who are driven and dedicated and devoted to serving you. So you need to follow them. And by the way, if you've ever wondered, how men get elected to eldership and to being pastors in a true Bible church, that right there has never changed. God never intended, by the way, for men to go, I think I'm a pastor. You know what? I woke up this morning and I looked in the mirror and you look a lot like a pastor. You should be an elder of a church. Your business is going well and you're now 51 and people at the church look up to you because you've made a lot of money. You should be. That's not it. What you saw right there in that single word is what should still be the case today. Where elders of a church look and they see a man who is qualified and is a gift by Christ to his church, and they say, there is spiritual fruit being born. That man is addicted to the church. That man is addicted to serving God's people. Therefore, we see that this is something God is doing, and we want to simply stand back and help him get to the place that Christ wants him to be. That's it. He's already doing it. The elders of the church just acknowledge and affirm it. Spurgeon used to say that, right? He said, how did I know a man was to be a pastor? I'd look around the church and I would watch where all the children and young adults would flock or float around a man like bees to a flower. That's what it is. And number 2, look at this. It's not just devoted men. Look at verse 15. He also calls them ministering men. Did you see that? He says, and they have devoted themselves for ministry. Everyone know what ministry means? You say, I want to be in ministry. Ministry means you're a table waiter. It means you're a busboy. It means you put yourself at the bottom and you wash feet. That's what it means. And he says these people, these men were devoted. They were addicted to serving the saints. And then my favorite one, look at the last one. Jump over to verse 17. Is he says that they were refreshing men. Look at verse 17. He says, they have supplied what you didn't, O church at Corinth, for they have refreshed my spirit and yours. I love that word in the Greek, revitalized. They have energized my spirit. And I think we all would agree, is that not the greatest compliment that someone could ever give you? To say that you energize them, you motivate them in the things of the Lord, right? Rather than what would be the opposite? You de-energize me, right? That would not be a compliment. I just want you to know, when I'm with you, I want to be less like Christ. Oh. But I want you to think about that. In fact, many of you may remember the old, they used to call it elevator people, the old preachers. You get the picture, right? Elevator people. So there's 2 ways when you meet somebody or get to know someone in the church, they tend to take your spirit. There's some people, we all know, maybe some of you are sitting next to one, I don't know. Don't say it because it might be a long drive home. But there's some people where you get in, you wake up in the morning and you're doing well. On a big skyscraper, 1 to 30, you're operating at floor 15. And until you meet them in the elevator at work or until you meet them at the house, and suddenly what happens? It's like getting on to the life elevator with Eeyore. And they drain you. And you walk onto the elevator, and it's like, and you're in the basement. You can already picture who I'm talking about. And then you start to think, man, when I go to church, I want to make sure I stay away from that guy. And then you're leaving to the church, you're ready to get in the car, you're going to go have a great lunch, you're all motivated and fired up, you've been fueled up for the gospel of Jesus, and then you hear that voice in the background, hey, wait up, and you're thinking, oh no. Lock the door, honey, quick. But what about, everyone know? What about the opposite? You got some people in your life who refresh you, who revitalize you, who energize you. I mean, you wake up in the morning and you're down at level 1. And you're having a tough day for a multitude of reasons, mentally and emotionally and physically. Everything's going south and you're wondering who you are, but all it takes is a 3-minute encounter with such and such, and you know what's going to happen. Whammo! And you're on the rooftop of the skyscraper going, I know who I am in Christ, and I'm ready to change the world, and I'm going to do this thing, baby, because God loves me, and I'm going to go take that love and live it out, and I want to be with them again. Isn't that true? Can you think of people like that in your life? You just give me 3 minutes with them. In fact, it's the opposite. At church, you're following them around. The poor guy's trying to go to the restroom, and you're looking over your shoulder, and you're always there. Hey, how you doing? How you doing? How's it going? Whatever it is, Paul said that word here, and he says Stephanas and Fortunatus and Achaicus, he actually was a man who would energize me. Now, when you think about that, that's the Apostle Paul who traveled further and spoke more than any missionary in the history of the world outside of Christ, has had a broader impact than anyone in the world, and he says, those 3 men, they energized me. So if Paul were here today, he'd walk over, he'd grab our little chinny chin chin and hold it up, and he would say, guys, if you happen to be in a church where you have leaders who, number 1, are going to be addicted to church and addicted to serving you, and they refresh you. Look at verse 16. What does he say you need to do? You need to joyfully and willingly follow them, because it's rare. And then he finishes with what is every Bible college guy's favorite verse in the Bible. You ready for this? So number 1, he's clear. And he says, I want you to think bigger as you give. Number 2, think bigger as you host. Number 3, think bigger as you follow. And this is great. This is the end. He says, I even want you to think bigger as you embrace or as you hug, as you care. Number 4. And this is every Bible college kid's, especially the guys, favorite verse in the Bible. Let me show you this. You look at verse 19. You ready? Some of you already know because you used it. The churches of Asia greet you. Aquila and Priscilla, or Prissa, greet you heartily in the Lord with the church that is in their house, and all the brethren greet you. So greet one another with a holy what? Yeah, see, this is what the Bible college guys do. You need to get ready for this, young ladies. You go to Bible college, and then suddenly it's like, oh, we just really need to do a sit-down and a dorm study on 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 20. And we need to really exegete this deeply, because I really think Paul is saying, we need to do more greeting in a biblical way. Don't buy it, ladies, because see, a true woman of the word is going to actually stop the Bible study and point out, well, let's look at the beginning of verse 20. All the brothers. And she's just going to sit there and go, mm-hmm. So don't let anyone do that to you, right? But just real quick, got a pen? How many times did he use the word greet? The churches of Asia greet you. Aquila and Priscilla greet you. Verse 20, all the brethren greet you. And then he turns the final command in the entire book, exposing their pride, and says, I want you now to start what? Greeting one another. I need you to start showing affection to each other. In a hard-hitting, remote, cold, head down, fast-paced, online-only, AI-run metaverse, I need you to start walking into church, get your eyes off yourself, look people in the eye, cross the room, stick out your hand, offer an embrace, and actually start to care.